In December 2008, veteran criminal defense attorney Robert Macedonio appeared in a Suffolk County courtroom, this time as a defendant. "It's embarrassing for me to be standing here," Macedonio told Judge James Hudson as he pleaded guilty to felony cocaine possession. The plea cost Macedonio his law license. A career that saw him rise from a junior Suffolk County prosecutor to a sought-after attorney for high-profile defendants appeared over. But 3 years later, under unusual circumstances that have been largely hidden from public view, Hudson and District Attorney Thomas Spoda allowed Macedonio to reduce his felony conviction to a misdemeanor, paving the way for him to regain his law license. Macedonio got his second chance under a legal provision designed to correct miscarriages of justice, such as when new evidence clears the innocent or when prosecutorial error or fraud undermines a conviction. Such circumstances have not been publicly disclosed in the Macedonio case, raising questions of how an attorney with long-standing ties to Suffolk County's law enforcement system faced no opposition as he successfully wiped away his felony guilty plea. Answers to those questions are elusive because so much of the Macedonio case, from the investigation to the prosecution to the vacated felony conviction, remains secret. Records have been sealed without explanation or were not filed at all. One batch of documents at the county clerk's office has been hidden from the public in a manila envelope bearing the following handwritten message. This envelope, as well as why sealed, is sealed. Newsday obtained some of the sealed records, and they reveal that behind what appears on the surface to be a routine drug possession case was actually an extensive investigation by Spoda's office into financial crimes that included mortgage fraud. The records show investigators spent at least a year probing alleged criminal activity involving Macedonio, and they uncovered enough evidence to convince judges to authorize them to raid Macedonio's law office and seize his bank accounts and property. An investigator would allege after the raid that Macedonio had used his law firm's escrow account to launder funds in a mortgage fraud scam. Prosecutors would file court records estimating that the proceeds of the alleged criminal schemes tied to Macedonio exceeded $4 million. Despite the allegations and the resources poured into the DA's investigation, the results were minimal. The criminal charges against Macedonio and 4 associates linked to him were either dropped or ended with light plea deals, and none of the targets received more than 9 months in jail. The available records do not explain how an ambitious financial crimes investigation into Macedonio ended in a simple drug possession charge. Newsday asked Hudson to unseal records from the case, including the search warrant affidavit investigators filed with him to justify the raid of Macedonio's office. The document could reveal the evidence investigators had gathered and, for the first time, allow the public to consider the merits of the district attorney's pursuit of Macedonio. Feds probe response to alleged bribe. Thomas Spoda, the Suffolk district attorney at the time, was being investigated for possibly failing to investigate a politically connected attorney at the center of a bribe allegation, according to Newsday. The Suffolk district attorney was being investigated for possibly failing to investigate a politically connected attorney at the center of a bribe allegation. According to Newsday, the feds have interviewed several people with knowledge of the 2007 wiretap investigation of defense lawyer Robert Macedonio. Sources tell Newsday that federal investigators want to know if Macedonio paid prosecutor John Scott Prudenti to help secure the early release of a violent felon. The report says the case could be part of a larger federal probe into possible selective prosecution under District Attorney Thomas Spoda. Spoda faced scrutiny for lawyers' reduced conviction. The Suffolk County District Attorney is reportedly facing scrutiny from federal officials after a lawyer's drug conviction was vacated and then reduced. Robert Macedonio, a criminal defense attorney, the Suffolk County District Attorney, was reportedly facing scrutiny from federal officials after a lawyer's drug conviction was vacated and then reduced. Robert Macedonio, a criminal defense attorney and former Suffolk County prosecutor, pleaded guilty in 2008 to felony cocaine possession, and he lost his law license. A few years later, Macedonio's conviction was vacated and reduced to a misdemeanor, opening the door for him to regain his law license. According to Newsday, federal investigators have issued subpoenas to the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office that seek records about the case. However, most of those records are sealed, which some legal analysts say is unusual. Some sources question whether Macedonio received preferential treatment. "I did not receive special, preferential treatment from the District Attorney's Office," said Macedonio. In an exclusive interview with News 12, he said after he pleaded guilty, the state started a program that allows convicted drug felons to change their pleas upon completion of rehab. "Your plea is vacated and you are given a misdemeanor or, in some cases, a violation," said Macedonio. "That's opposed to having a felony conviction on your record." A spokesperson for the district attorney vehemently denied that any preferential treatment was given. In a statement, the office said that 150 times during Thomas Spoda's tenure, a defendant pleaded guilty to a felony and was later able to change the charge to a misdemeanor. Suffolk County legislator Kate Browning remains skeptical about the way the case was handled. "I'm not a lawyer, but it certainly seems a little odd that someone who was barred from being able to practice law can be reinstated," she said. Macedonio's law license was reinstated after a process that was more than a year long, and he said the district attorney's office wasn't involved in that process. Suffolk exec sues DA for financial records. Suffolk County Executive Steve Bellone is suing the county's district attorney for the release of his bureau chief's financial disclosure records. John Scott Prudenti, a longtime county prosecutor, has been accused of corruption, taking bribes, and renting out his party boat to defense attorneys he squares off against in court. The public has a right to know if one of the highest-ranking law enforcement officers in this county has committed violations that would be felony violations of the county ethics code, says Bellone. Bellone is accusing Suffolk DA Tom Spoda of protecting Prudenti, and he claims other officials can back him up. County Sheriff Vinnie DeMarco noted that this district attorney's office, under Tom Spoda, has been outed as a den of corruption, Bellone says. Now we turn to the courts to ask for help. Bellone called for Spoda to resign after allegations that his office failed to investigate alleged criminal wrongdoing relating to former Suffolk County Police Chief James Burke, who had been convicted of wrongdoing. But ethics law expert and attorney Paul Sabatino says Bellone's lawsuit amounts to a political grandstanding because he's suing the wrong party. Sabatino says it's the county's ethics board that controls the financial disclosure forms. If he's suing the district attorney and not naming the ethics board, then he's going to lose the lawsuit for sure because he's not naming the right party, Sabatino says. Throughout most of 2007, day and night, the Suffolk County District Attorney's Government Corruption Bureau eavesdropped on a politically connected attorney's wiretapped phone. The wiretap began with a tip that a prosecutor in the office, John Scott Prudenti, had taken a bribe in exchange for getting a violent felon out of prison. The wiretapped phone belonged to the man who allegedly paid off Prudenti, Robert Macedonio, a cocaine and alcohol-addicted defense attorney who would occasionally roll up to the courthouse in a Bentley and step out wearing diamonds and a mink coat. Suffolk investigators and prosecutors listened as Macedonio plotted what they believed to be criminal activity with cocaine traffickers, judges, gang members, and various public officials. In some phone calls, he was overheard arranging cocaine purchases or tipping off clients to law enforcement informants, whom he referred to as rats to be poisoned. In other calls, he discussed deals to launder campaign contributions or trade patronage jobs for judgeships. Operating in secrecy out of an unmarked building in a Hauppauge industrial park, upwards of 15 investigators worked the sprawling case. Some had been pulled from a police narcotics squad, while others were financial specialists probing alleged money laundering and mortgage fraud schemes orchestrated from Macedonio's Central Islip Law Office. Investigators cultivated informants, sent co-conspirators undercover wearing wires, conducted surveillance, issued subpoenas, and obtained warrants to wiretap more than a dozen phone numbers, building dossiers not just on Macedonio, but also cocaine dealers, armed robbers, and public officials. The top 3 officials in the Suffolk District Attorney's Office managed the operation. District Attorney Thomas Spoda signed affidavits detailing evidence of criminal that justified the need for wiretaps. His top assistant and chief of the Government Corruption Bureau, Prosecutor Christopher McPartland, often listened in live to the intercepted phone conversations. And James Burke, who at the time was the district attorney's chief investigator, worked in tandem with McPartland to guide the probe. It looked like a case destined to end with a press conference touting high-profile indictments involving drug trafficking, mortgage fraud, public corruption, and cocaine distribution in Long Island high schools. But according to several officials with knowledge of the investigation, most of the criminal activity went unpunished, and investigators were left wondering why such an extensive wiretap operation resulted in so few prosecutions. Who is Benjamin Piccolo? How is he tied to Thomas Spoda, John Sof Prudenti, and Robert Macedonio? Court records show that Macedonio was a key participant in the case of Benjamin Piccolo, a violent felon whose early release from prison would be an impetus for the district's attorney's extensive wiretap investigation. Macedonio represented Piccolo at his arraignment in 1999, when the felon was prosecuted for masterminding an armed robbery, and called the district attorney's case a fishing expedition, according to a Newsday article at the time. In 2000, Piccolo was convicted of 2 violent felonies after he pleaded guilty to attempted robbery and attempted burglary in the first degree. In 2004, court records show Macedonio helped secure Piccolo's early release from a 7-year sentence. Officials familiar with the district attorney's Macedonio prosecution told Newsday that the tip that Macedonio bribed Prudenti in return for help securing Piccolo's release was one of several leads involving public corruption that investigators said they were prevented from aggressively pursuing. Those officials said investigators were able to determine that Prudenti misled a judge in 2003 when he said Piccolo had agreed to provide key information and help gain the conviction of another felon. Prudenti cited Piccolo's alleged willingness to cooperate as he asked the judge to reduce Piccolo's original 7-year sentence. Federal officials have been told by sources involved in the Macedonio case that contrary to what Prudenti said, Piccolo absolutely did not want to cooperate and had to be subpoenaed to testify, according to the person with knowledge of the federal investigation. The officials familiar with the district attorney's investigation said investigators were told that Macedonio bribed Prudenti by paying him to charter the prosecutor's boat. The investigators separately learned that Macedonio had chartered the boat on at least one occasion, and they intercepted a phone call in which he told another defense attorney that though Prudenti wanted him to go out on his boat to talk, Macedonio did not want to rent the prosecutor's boat or take anybody out on it. After securing Piccolo's early release, district attorney investigators caught Macedonio on a wiretap discussing a range of potential criminal activity with Piccolo, including witness tampering, according to officials. Macedonio and Piccolo plotted to retaliate against a man whom they referred to as a rat by exposing him as a criminal informant. The wiretap investigation ultimately ended in 2008 when Macedonio pleaded guilty to felony cocaine possession, although that conviction was later vacated with the help of prosecutors. State criminal court records show Piccolo was not convicted of any crime stemming from the district attorney's investigation. So the question is, why did Robert Macedonio's felony conviction result in a light, conditional sentence, then mild probation? More astonishing is why, 3 years later, his felony conviction was reduced at DA Spoda's urging to a misdemeanor, allowing Macedonia's law license to be restored. Public files on this case are largely empty, adding to this disgrace. One public file in this case bears the message, "This file envelope as well as why sealed is sealed." In fact, lawyers and journalists report that now more than ever, criminal case files assembled in the name of the people are sealed without explanation and inaccessible. Neither Cini nor Perini ever mention this. Part of Robert A. Macedonio's circle, Thomas J. Spoda and Government Corruption Bureau Chief Christopher McPartland, each sentenced to 5 years in prison. Former Suffolk County District Attorney Thomas J. Spoda and Christopher McPartland, the former Chief of Investigations and Chief of the Government Corruption Bureau of the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, SCDAO, were each sentenced in 2021 by United States District Judge Joan M. Azraq to 5 years in prison. Additionally, Spota was ordered to pay a $100,000 fine. The sentences stem from the defendant's December 17, 2019 convictions, following a 6-week federal jury trial on all 4 counts of the indictment, specifically of conspiracy to tamper with witnesses and obstruct an official proceeding, witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and being accessories after the fact to former Suffolk County Police Department, SCPD. Chief of Department James Burke's deprivation of a prisoner's civil rights, Jacqueline M. Casoulis, Acting United States Attorney for the Eastern District of New York, and Jacqueline McGuire, Acting Assistant Director in Charge, Federal Bureau of Investigation, New York Field Office FBI, announced the sentences. When a sitting district attorney and one of his top prosecutors are corrupt and use their power to intimidate witnesses and cover up a brutal assault by a high-ranking law enforcement official, they not only jeopardize the safety of citizens who are entitled to the protection of the law, they also undermine confidence in the integrity and fairness of our criminal justice system, stated Acting U.S. Attorney Casoulis. Instead of serving the people of Suffolk County, these defendants brazenly abuse their exceptional positions of power and public trust to protect their friends and hurt their enemies. With today's sentences, justice has been served, and the defendants have learned the consequences of their crimes, just like anyone else who has broken the law. I commend the tenacity and skill of this office's prosecutors and the FBI special agents in toppling the defendants from their undeserved positions of prominence and in holding them to account for their reprehensible violations of the public trust. With great power comes great responsibility, and as we've proven throughout the course of this investigation, Mr. Spota and Mr. McPartland abused their power to skirt their responsibility to comply with a federal civil rights investigation. They placed fear of retaliation inside the minds of those who may otherwise have been willing to cooperate, and they interfered with efforts of federal investigators who were trying to get to the bottom of a heinous crime. Their behavior was outrageous, and their sentences today prove as much. There is absolutely no place for this type of behavior within our criminal justice system. Those who abuse their power and subject others to cruel and unnecessary punishment must be removed from serving in any official capacity and must pay the price for their conduct. Only then, and with today's sentences, the earned trust and confidence of the citizens of Suffolk County can be justly restored, stated FBI Acting Assistant Director in Charge McGuire. In December 2012, then Chief of the SCPD, James Burke, the highest-ranking uniformed police official in Suffolk County, physically and verbally assaulted a shackled prisoner, Christopher Loeb, who was under arrest and being held in an interrogation room at the 4th Precinct in Hauppauge, New York. Loeb had broken into Burke's official police vehicle and stolen his gun belt and ammunition and a duffel bag containing cigars, sex toys, prescription Viagra, and pornography. After the assault, Burke ordered high-ranking lieutenants of the SCPD to ensure that the detectives and officers who had witnessed the assault would never reveal what they had observed. Burke also enlisted the help of his longtime mentor, then District Attorney Spota, and McPartland, his personal friend and then chief of both investigations and the Government Corruption Bureau, to ensure that the witnesses kept quiet. Having served as the Suffolk County DA for over a decade, Spota had successfully helped Burke avoid legal trouble regularly during their decades-long friendship. McPartland, who worked directly under Spota, also had built a close friendship with Burke, and was the first person who Burke called the morning he discovered that his vehicle had been burglarized. A federal grand jury investigation into the Loeb assault as a civil rights deprivation was opened by the U.S. Attorney's Brooklyn office with the assistance of the FBI in the spring of 2013. Burke, Spota, and McPartland used the power and influence of their official positions and the threat of retaliatory arrest and prosecution to keep anyone from cooperating with that investigation. Because of their obstructive efforts, the federal investigation was unsuccessful and was closed approximately 8 months later. Local law enforcement eyewitnesses had been frightened into silence, as they feared retaliation against themselves and their families from within the Suffolk County Police Department and the District Attorney's Office. Approximately 1 year later, prosecutors from U.S. Attorney's Long Island Criminal Division reopened the investigation. As certain key witnesses were then compelled to testify before the grand jury under a grant of immunity, the truth about Burke assaulting Loeb finally emerged. Burke pleaded guilty to a civil rights violation and conspiracy to obstruct justice in February 2016 and was sentenced to 46 months imprisonment. Spada and McPartland both resigned from the district attorney's office in light of the charges against them and have since been disbarred. The government's case is being handled by the office's Long Island Criminal Division. Assistant United States Attorneys Nicole Boakman, Laura Trinas-Gatz, Justina L. Gerasi, and Michael R. Maffei are in charge of the prosecution. Stay tuned for Part 2 as we uncover and expose the connection between same attorney who represented John Bitterolf, the Manorville butcher, represented Robert A. Macedonio. In his appeal, why is 666 Old Country Road in Uniondale, NY, connected to Robert Macedonio and Rex Huerman? How odd is it that John Ray's former business partner, Ves Midev, is now representing the adult children of Rex Huerman? How did Ves Midev ever hook up with the likes of Robert A. Macedonio? What happened to that guy? These questions will all be covered in Part 2 of Robert A. Macedonio Exposed. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to True Crime with Guarantee.